When Marcus texted me, "Mom, we had to cancel the family trip. Finances won't allow it. We'll reschedule for later," I believed him. I worked all summer long taking extra shifts, while they, as they told me, were also working hard to recover financially. 3 weeks later, I opened Instagram and saw the truth. My daughter-in-law, Chantel, had posted photos of a Caribbean cruise. My whole family was there. Marcus in a crisp white linen shirt, smiling under the sun. Chantel in a fancy, expensive coral dress. My grandkids Jamal and Naomi sporting designer straw hats that cost a fortune on those ships. Even Chantel's parents, Chuck and Eleanor Hundle, were in the picture toasting with champagne. Everyone but me. The caption read, "Unforgettable family vacation." Unforgettable? That word felt like a rusty knife twisting in my chest. I stayed quiet. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I didn't call them. I simply held my silence and continued with my life as if nothing had happened. But in that instant, something inside of me broke forever. 3 weeks after the discovery, my phone vibrated at 7 in the morning. It was Marcus. "Mom, I urgently need $6,000. Credit card issue. I'll pay you back next month." I read the message 5 times. Every word was a slap in the face. $6,000. Urgent, as always, just like it had been for the last 8 years. My fingers were trembling when I typed the reply. "Ask your wife's family." 4 words that changed everything. 4 words that cost me decades of submission, but which gave me something I never imagined: freedom. Marcus tried to call 17 times that day. I didn't answer any of them. Chantel sent me a lengthy message full of confusing explanations about misunderstandings and surprises. I deleted it without reading the whole thing. That same afternoon, I went to the bank and closed the joint account we had shared for years. I canceled the extra cards they held in their names. I blocked the automatic transfers, and for the first time in nearly a decade, I breathed without feeling a hand on my throat. But to understand why those 4 words were so powerful, I need to go back to the beginning. I need to tell you how a 73-year-old Black woman who worked her entire life ended up being the ATM for her own family. How a mother's love became a gilded trap she didn't know how to escape. It all started 8 years ago, when my husband Earl passed away and left me alone with a paid-for house, a decent pension, and some savings. I was devastated, but Marcus seemed even more affected. He was my only son, my reason for living, and seeing him suffer broke my heart. One afternoon, 2 months after the funeral, he came to visit with Chantel. They sat on the very couch where I'm remembering all this now, and Marcus took my hand with that tenderness he always knew how to use so well. "Mom, I need to ask you for something," he said softly. "Chantel and I want to throw a special Sweet 16 party for Naomi. You know how she is, so sensitive, so fragile. But with the expense of Dad's funeral and the economy, we just can't swing it. I know it's a lot to ask, but could you lend us $10,000? I promise we'll pay you back in 6 months." I looked at Chantel. She nodded with a perfect smile, one of those she probably practiced in the mirror. "It's just a temporary loan, Ruby. We want Naomi to have a beautiful memory of this milestone. You understand, right?" Of course, I understood. I was the grandmother. I was the one who had to understand. I was the one who had just lost her husband and needed to feel useful. I needed to feel like I still mattered. So I said yes. I transferred the $10,000 the next day. Naomi had her party at an upscale private venue with colored lights and a chocolate fountain. I sat at a back table watching my granddaughter dance happily. They never paid me back. They never mentioned it again, and I never asked. 6 months later came the next request. "Mom, we need to remodel the kitchen. The pipes are old and there's a moisture problem. $8,000. Then it was Chantel's car because hers broke down. $12,000. After that, it was the private university for Jamal because the public option wasn't up to par. $45,000. $15,000 per year for 3 years. Each time there was a reason. Each time it was urgent. Each time it was temporary. And each time I opened my account and transferred the money without too many questions, because that's what mothers do, right? Sacrifice. Give without expecting anything in return. Be the invisible support holding everything together from the shadows. But what I didn't understand then, what took me years and $60,000 to realize, is that there's a huge difference between helping and being used, between love and manipulation, between family and convenience. The first years after Earl's death were confusing. I was lost in an ocean of loneliness, clinging to any floating board that would keep me afloat. And Marcus knew it. He knew every one of my weaknesses, every vulnerable corner of my heart as a widowed mother. He would visit on Sundays with Chantel and the kids, always with that long hug that made me feel like I still had a family, that I still mattered. "Mom, you look tired," he'd say, while Chantel made coffee in my kitchen, as if she owned the place. "You should rest more. We're here for whatever you need." And I felt lucky. How foolish, how blind, how desperately lonely I must have been not to see that those visits always ended with the request wrapped up like a gift. Marcus had a special talent for making his needs sound like family emergencies. He never said, "I want." He always said, "We need." It was never for him. It was always for the children, for the future, to maintain stability at home. "Mom, Jamal needs a math tutor if we want him to get into a good university." "Mom, Naomi needs braces urgently. The dentist says if we don't do it now, it'll be worse later." "Mom, we need to replace the roof. There are leaks and it could be dangerous." Every argument was solid. Like the video and subscribe to the channel to continue the story. And tell me in the comments what you think about the behavior and the story. Every reason seemed legitimate. And I, who had worked for 53 years as a certified nursing assistant and in hospital housekeeping, who had saved every penny with the discipline of someone who knows what scarcity feels like, opened my wallet again and again. Chantel was subtler, but just as effective. She never asked directly. Instead, she dropped poisoned comments disguised as concern. "Oh, Ruby, it's a shame you can't come to Jamal's birthday at the club, but I understand those places are a little too formal for you. It's a pity Naomi can't go on the class trip to Europe with her friends, but hey, not all kids have the same opportunities." And I, feeling guilty for having money while my grandchildren supposedly lacked something, ended up offering help that was never directly requested but was clearly expected. $3,000 for the trip. $2,000 for the club membership, $100 for Naomi's green graduation dress. Small financial bleedings that added up formed a river of money flowing in only one direction. There were signs I ignored, small alarms I turned off, because recognizing them would have meant admitting something too painful. Like that time I drove past their house and saw a brand new SUV in the driveway, a shiny, current-year model with chrome rims reflecting the sun. When I asked Marcus, he said it was borrowed from a friend. 2 months later, I saw Chantel driving it. Or when Naomi posted photos of a weekend at a beach resort, and I mentally calculated that trip must have cost at least $4,000, just 1 month after Marcus told me they were struggling with cash flow. But I stayed silent. I swallowed my doubts. I convinced myself that I was misinterpreting things, that I was just a suspicious old lady, and that if I questioned too much, I would lose the only family connection I had left. The truth is, I was afraid of being completely alone, afraid that if I stopped giving, they would stop coming, afraid of becoming a forgotten old woman in an empty house waiting for calls that would never come. So I kept being the generous mother, the involved grandmother, the one who always had an envelope of cash when needed. I settled for the crumbs of attention they threw my way, a 10-minute phone call every week, a monthly visit that lasted less than an hour, photos of my grandchildren I saw on social media because they never sent them to me directly. And I smiled and said everything was fine, that it was enough, that I understood they were busy. But inside, something was withering. A part of me was dying of emotional hunger while my bank account was draining. The breaking point began to form 6 months before the cruise, although I didn't know it at the time. Chantel organized a family dinner to celebrate her parents' wedding anniversary. I found out by chance when Naomi mentioned something in a quick FaceTime call. "Grandma, I can't talk long. We're getting ready for Grandpa and Nana Holt's party." I felt a sharp pain in my stomach. Grandpa and Nana Holt? As if I didn't exist? As if I wasn't a grandmother too? I called Marcus that night. "Son, Naomi mentioned a dinner." There was an awkward silence on the other end. "Oh, yeah, Mom. It's just something small, intimate. You know how Chantel's family is. Very tight-knit. I don't want you to feel bad, but we thought it would be better this way." I hung up, feeling an emptiness in my chest. I didn't feel bad. I felt invisible. But again, I kept silent. Again, I swallowed the humiliation. Again, I pretended I understood. 2 weeks after that call, Marcus showed up at my door looking worried. "I need to talk to you about something serious, Mom." We went into the living room and he sat on the edge of the couch with his hands clasped as if preparing to deliver bad news. "The company is going through layoffs. There's a chance I might get let go. Chantel is really stressed. The kids need stability. We need a financial cushion for the next few months, something that will allow us to breathe." He paused for a long time. "Could you lend us $20,000? $20,000? The figure hit me like a punch to the gut. It was more than he had ever asked for at once. "Marcus, that's a lot of money," I said, my voice trembling. "I know, Mom. Believe me, if I had another option, I wouldn't ask you. But you're the only person we can trust. You're our safety net. Please." His eyes had that scared little boy look that always melted me. And once again, I gave in. I transferred the $20,000 on a Tuesday morning. I remember that day perfectly because I had to go to the bank in person to authorize such a large amount. The teller, a young woman with rectangular glasses, asked me 3 times if I was sure. "It's for my family," I said. She nodded with a professional smile, but her eyes said something else. I had seen that look before, that mixture of pity and silent judgment reserved for older women who seemed too naive. I signed the papers without further hesitation because at that moment, I still believed I was saving my son from a real crisis. I still believed the money was a temporary bridge to better times. I still believed in the word family. Marcus called me that afternoon, his voice full of relief. "Thank you, Mom. You don't know the weight you've taken off my shoulders. I promise this is temporary. In 6 months, I'll pay you back in full, I swear." I hung up, feeling useful, needed, important. What a bitter irony. The next 2 months were strangely silent. Marcus didn't call as often as before. His texts were short, generic. "All good, Mom. Busy with work." Chantel stopped responding to my messages in the family chat. When I tried to video call the grandkids, they were always busy with homework, friends, or extracurriculars. I started to feel that horrible sensation of being a bother, of interrupting lives that worked perfectly fine without me. One afternoon, I called Marcus directly. I needed to hear his voice. I needed confirmation that I still existed for him. "Mom, I can't talk right now." "I'm in an important meeting. I'll call you back," he said hurriedly. He never called. That night, I sat in the kitchen with a cup of tea that grew cold while I watched the phone in silence, waiting for something I knew wouldn't arrive. It was Dot, my neighbor from the apartment next door, who made me start questioning things. She was 68, a widow like me, but there was something different about her, a kind of quiet dignity, a self-possession I lacked. One afternoon, she invited me over for coffee. "Ruby, forgive me for prying, but I've seen you these past few months and you look different, quieter. What's going on?" And there, without planning it, unable to hold it in anymore, I told her everything. The loans that were never repaid, the broken promises, the feeling of buying crumbs of attention with $100 bills. Dot listened without interrupting, her brown eyes fixed on mine. When I finished speaking, she sighed deeply. "Ruby, you aren't a mother. You're a bank, and banks charge interest, not just financial, but emotional. What are you getting back for everything you give? The question haunted me for days. What was I getting back? Rushed calls, obligatory visits, the privilege of being remembered only when money was needed. A week after that conversation, something small but significant happened. It was Jamal's birthday. My eldest grandson was turning 21. I had bought a gift a month in advance, an expensive, genuine leather wallet I knew he would like. I called Marcus to ask what time the family gathering would be. There was an awkward silence. Mom, Jamal just wants something small this year, just with his friends. You know how young people are now, but I'll take your gift to him, don't worry. I hung up, feeling something new. It wasn't sadness. It was rage. Rage that I wasn't even invited to the periphery of their lives. Rage that Jamal had had 21 birthdays and I had been present at every single one. I had paid for several, and now I didn't even deserve an hour of his time. That night, I opened my laptop and reviewed my bank statements for the last 8 years. I had never done it systematically. I had never added it all up because I was afraid to see the final number. But that night, I needed to know. I needed to quantify exactly how much it had cost to maintain the illusion that I mattered. I opened a spreadsheet and started typing. Naomi's $16,000, kitchen $8,000, Chantel's car $12,000, Jamal's university 3 years $45,000, roof $7,000, class trip $3,000, club membership $2,000. And I kept adding dresses, tutors, medical emergencies for which I never saw bills, repairs for things that never broke. When I reached the end, the number on the screen glowed like an accusation. $62,300. $62,300 in 8 years. I stared at that figure until the numbers blurred. That was my life. That was the exact sum of 53 years of working, saving, sacrificing. And what did I have in return? An empty house, a phone that didn't ring, grandchildren who treated me like an awkward obligation, a son who saw me as a solution to his financial problems, not a person. I closed the laptop and something inside me hardened. It was as if a steel door had slammed shut in my chest. I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I only felt a strange coldness, an icy clarity I had never experienced. For the first time in 8 years, I began to wonder if a mother's love had to be synonymous with self-destruction, if giving without limits was a virtue or just cowardice disguised a sacrifice. A week later, the message about the family trip arrived. Marcus called me on a Saturday afternoon. His voice was casual, relaxed. Mom, I have to tell you something. We had planned a family cruise for this summer, but we're going to have to cancel it. The economy just isn't allowing for those luxuries. We're going to postpone it for next year when things improve. I felt something strange in my stomach, like a silent alarm. What cruise, son? You never mentioned it to me. Oh, well, it was an idea Chantel and I had. We wanted to surprise you, but it's better to be realistic, right? No sense in going into debt now. We'll just have a quiet vacation at home. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. All right, son, I understand. We hung up, and I stared at the phone with a strange feeling. Something in his tone wasn't right. Something about the story sounded rehearsed. But I decided to believe him. I decided to give him one last chance, the benefit of the doubt, that blind faith that mothers reserve for their children, even when all the evidence screams that they are wrong. The summer holidays arrived, and I stayed home. I cleaned closets that didn't need cleaning. I reorganized old photos. I cooked elaborate meals for one person and stored the leftovers in the refrigerator until they spoiled. One afternoon, Dot invited me to go with her to a book club for older women at the community center. No, thank you, I said. I'm not in the mood. She looked at me with that brutal frankness that only good friends allow themselves. Ruby, are you waiting for your phone to ring? You're living in pause. That's not life. It's just existing. She was right, but I wasn't ready to admit it. Not yet. 3 weeks passed from the start of the holidays. 3 weeks of almost absolute silence from Marcus. Not a call to ask how I was, not a simple text to see if I needed anything. Nothing. just that emptiness that felt heavier every day. I tried to convince myself that he was busy, that having a station also required time, that he was probably dedicating himself to the kids, enjoying that much-needed rest. But deep down, in that dark place where we keep the truths we don't want to face, I knew something wasn't right. There was a persistent unease, like when you know you forgot something important but can't remember what. That feeling stayed with me from morning until night, settled in my stomach like a cold stone. On a Thursday afternoon, while making a vegetable soup, I knew I wouldn't finish. My phone vibrated with a notification. It was Instagram. I didn't usually check social media much. I had only installed it so I could see pictures of my grandchildren, those small fragments of their lives I had been reduced to. But that day, something made me open the app. Maybe it was intuition. Maybe it was the universe pushing me toward the truth I had been avoiding. I saw that Chantel had posted something 20 minutes ago. My heart started beating faster, and I didn't know why. I tapped her profile, and there it was. The first photo was of her on the deck of a huge ship with the turquoise sea behind her, wearing that coral dress that must have cost a fortune, her sunglasses reflecting the sky. A perfect smile. Too perfect. The caption read, "Unforgettable family vacation." I swiped to the next photo. Marcus was there in a white linen shirt, tanned, holding a cocktail decorated with tropical fruit and a tiny umbrella. He looked relaxed, happy, not a single worry on his face. Nothing in that image suggested financial problems. Nothing indicated that he had had to cancel the trip for lack of money. I kept swiping. Jamal and Naomi by the ship's pool, wearing those expensive straw hats sold in the cruise line's luxury boutiques. Another photo of the whole family, having dinner in what looked like an elegant restaurant inside the ship with white tablecloths and wine glasses. And then the one that completely shattered me, a group photo. Marcus, Chantel, Jamal, Naomi, and Chantel's parents, Chuck and Eleanor. All smiling, all toasting, all together. A complete family, enjoying an unforgettable vacation. Everyone but me. I felt the air rush out of my lungs. My hands began to shake so much I almost dropped the phone. I looked at the photos again, one by one, as if I were searching for a logical explanation, some detail that would prove I was misinterpreting everything. But there was nothing to interpret. The truth was brutal and simple. They had lied to me. Marcus had looked me in the eye while he had spoken to me on the phone with that serious, worried voice, and he had deliberately lied to me. They hadn't canceled the trip. They had canceled me. They had decided that I didn't deserve to be there, that the grandmother who had financed their lives for 8 years wasn't important enough to be included in the unforgettable family vacation. But Chantel's mother was. She deserved to be in those photos. She was part of the family. I counted the posts, 14 in total, 14 moments captured and shared with the whole world. 14 proofs that my existence in their lives was completely dispensable. In one of the photos, Chantel posed in front of a giant plate of lobster with the phrase, "When life treats you right," life as if life had been the generous one, as if the money for that cruise had fallen from the sky. I started mentally calculating a Caribbean cruise for 5 people, because obviously Chantel's parents were included in the package. With the ocean view cabins seen in the photos, the elaborate food, the decorated cocktails, I was easily looking at $10,000, maybe more. $15,000 spent on vacation, while they were telling me they had financial problems, while they were asking me to understand that they couldn't afford those luxuries. I stood up and walked to the window. My legs felt weak, like they belonged to someone else. Outside, the sun shone indifferently. People walked down the street, living their normal lives, while mine fell apart in silence. I took the phone again. This time, I analyzed every detail with a coldness I didn't know I possessed. The date of the posts matched exactly the 3 weeks they had been on vacation. The same 3 weeks I had spent alone at home, feeling guilty for questioning their version, convincing myself that I was a distrustful mother for doubting my own son. I zoomed in on one of the photos where the name of the cruise line was visible on a life preserver. I searched online. It was a luxury line, one of those that advertised premium experiences, five-star gastronomy, world-class entertainment. It was definitely not a budget trip. I closed my eyes and tried to take a deep breath, but the air wouldn't fill my lungs completely. There was a pressure in my chest as if someone were sitting on my ribs. It wasn't just the lie, it was the premeditation. They had planned this. They had consciously decided to exclude me. They had invented a complete story to keep me away. And the worst part, the thing that truly tore me up inside, was that they hadn't even had the decency to keep it private. They had published it on social media. They knew I might see it. Or perhaps, and this was even more painful, they simply didn't care. Maybe they didn't even think about me enough to consider that I would block them from their posts. I sat down again, this time on the floor, my back against the wall. The phone was still in my hand, the photos still on the screen. I thought about all the times I had justified their behavior, all the excuses I had invented in my head to explain their distance, their coldness, their constant requests for money, followed by long silences. I thought about the $62,300, about every bank transfer, every envelope of cash, every promise of repayment that never materialized. And I asked myself with a brutal, belated clarity, if I had ever been anything more to them than a resource. Did my son love me, or did he only love what I could give him? Did my grandchildren truly know me, or did they only know the grandmother who showed up with expensive gifts and financial solutions? The soup on the stove began to boil, and the sound brought me back to reality. I got up, moving on autopilot, turned off the burner, and served a bowl I knew I wouldn't eat. I sat at the kitchen table, the same one where Marcus had made so many of his requests, where Chantel had drunk coffee while dropping her poisoned comments disguised as concern. And there, in that heavy silence, I made a decision. I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to call them. I wasn't going to confront them. I wasn't going to give them the drama they probably expected if I ever found out. I was going to do something much more powerful. I was going to stay silent. I was going to wait. And when they needed something again, when they came knocking on my door again with their manufactured emergencies and convenient crises, my answer would be there. But it wouldn't be the answer of the submissive mother I had been for 8 years. It would be the answer of a woman who had finally woken up. I put the phone away without deleting the photos, without blocking anyone, without making any hasty move. This time, I was going to be smart. This time, I was going to wait for the right moment. 3 weeks, I calculated. In 3 weeks, they would be back from the cruise, and then only then they would see that something had changed, that the human wallet they had relied on for 8 years had just closed forever. That night, I didn't sleep. I stayed awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling an ancient part of me die, and something new, something harder and stronger, begin to be born from the rubble. The days that followed the discovery were strange. I continued my normal routine, but everything felt different, as if I were watching my own life from the outside. I got up, made coffee, cleaned the house, watched TV, but none of it really touched me. It was like being underwater, where all sounds are muffled and distant. Dot knocked on my door on Saturday morning. "Ruby, you look terrible. What happened?" She walked in without waiting for an invitation and sat on the couch with that familiarity only true friends allow. I couldn't hold it in anymore. I showed her the photos one by one. She looked at them in silence, her expression moving from surprise to indignation and finally to a cold rage I had never seen in her. "That son of a gun," she said flatly. "Excuse my language, Ruby, but this is unforgivable. This isn't carelessness. This is calculated cruelty." I nodded without saying anything, because if I opened my mouth, I knew I would break. Dot stayed with me that day and the next. She didn't try to give me empty advice or platitudes about forgiveness and family. She was just there. She forced me to eat when I wasn't hungry. She made me walk in the park when I wanted to stay locked up. And most importantly, she validated my pain without trying to minimize it. One evening, while we were having tea in her apartment, she told me something that stuck in my memory. Ruby, you don't owe them anything. You don't owe them more chances. You don't owe them more understanding. You don't owe them more sacrifices. You've given enough. You've given too much. Now it's time to give yourself what they never gave you: respect. Those words were like permission I didn't know I needed. Permission to be angry. Permission to cut ties. Permission to choose myself for the first time in 8 years. Exactly 21 days passed since I saw the photos. 21 days of absolute silence. Not a single text asking how I was. Not a quick call to see if I needed anything. Nothing. They were too busy enjoying their luxury cruise to remember the woman who had made their lifestyle possible. I counted every day. Not because I was waiting for them anxiously, but because I knew with absolute certainty that at some point they were going to need something. They always needed something. And this time, I was going to be ready. I prepared my answer mentally hundreds of times. I practiced it in front of the mirror. I wrote it in a notebook. 4 words that would change everything. 4 words that would give me back my dignity. Ask your wife's family. On the morning of the 22nd day, a Tuesday, my phone vibrated at 7:15 a.m. It was a text from Marcus. My heart accelerated, but not with the anxious emotion of before, but with something more akin to the anticipation of a hunter who has been patiently waiting for their prey. I opened the message. Mom, I urgently need $6,000. Credit card issue. I'll pay you back next month. I read those words 5 times. Each one was a confirmation of everything I had suspected. Not a hello, not a how are you, not a single question about my well-being after 3 weeks of silence. Only the direct, crude request without any attempt to disguise it. $6,000. Urgent, as always, as if the last 8 years had taught them nothing except that Mom always says yes. Mom always opens her wallet. Mom always understands. But this mom had died 3 weeks ago, in front of those cruise photos. This was a new woman, a woman who had seen the truth and could no longer close her eyes. My fingers were trembling when I began to write, not from fear or doubt, but from an emotion I was slow to recognize because I had never felt it directed toward my son. It was power. It was control. It was the cold satisfaction of finally setting a boundary after years of being an open door. I wrote, "Ask your wife's family." I added nothing else. No explanations, no accusations, no emojis to soften the blow. Just those 4 words. Send. The blue checkmark appeared, indicating the message had been delivered, and then, almost immediately, the 2 blue checks. Red. I imagined his face, the initial confusion, then the discomfort, finally the panic when he understood that something fundamental had changed. I didn't have to wait long. 30 seconds later, my phone started ringing. Marcus calling. I didn't answer. He called again and again and again. I counted 17 calls in the next 3 hours. 17 desperate attempts to regain control of the situation, to put me back in my place as the obedient, solution-dispensing mother. But I didn't answer any. Every rejected call was an act of personal revolution. Every ignored ring was a declaration of independence. I was shaking, I won't lie. Years of conditioning screamed at me to answer, to hear his side, to give him the benefit of the doubt. But there was another voice, newer but stronger, that reminded me of the cruise photos, that reminded me of the $62,000, that reminded me that I too deserved respect. At 2 in the afternoon, a message arrived from Chantel. It was long, full of exclamation points and capital letters. "Ruby, I don't understand what's going on. Marcus is so worried. There must be a misunderstanding. Can we please talk like adults? The children are confused. You can't do this to your own family." I read the message with a calm that surprised me. There was the classic manipulation, making me the villain, making my refusal sound like an attack on the family, as if I were the one who had broken something, as if setting a boundary after years of abuse was an unforgivable crime. I noticed that she didn't once mention the cruise, not an apology, not a recognition of the lie, just indignation at my audacity to say no. I deleted the message without replying. That was going to drive her crazier than any words I could write. That same afternoon, my hands still trembling, but with a determination that grew with every minute, I went to the bank. I asked for the same teller with the rectangular glasses who had helped me when I transferred the $20,000. She recognized me immediately. "How can I help you today, ma'am?" "I need to close the joint account I have with my son," I said. My voice sounded firmer than I expected. "I also need to cancel all the extra cards in their names and block any automatic transfer authorizations." She blinked, surprised. "Are you sure? It's an important decision." "I am completely sure," I replied. "I've never been sure of anything in my life." I filled out the necessary forms. I signed where indicated, and with each signature, I felt like I was reclaiming pieces of myself that I had given away thinking I was buying love. The process took almost 2 hours. While the teller processed everything in the system, I sat in that uncomfortable plastic chair and felt something strange. Peace. It wasn't the quiet, warm peace of movies. It was something closer to the silence after a storm, when everything is broken, but the rain has finally stopped. The teller handed me the final documents. "The joint account is closed. The cards are canceled. They no longer have access to your funds, ma'am." "Thank you," I said. And then, without planning it, I added, "I should have done this years ago." She looked at me with a sad understanding. Better late than never. Sometimes love makes us blind. I left the bank feeling that I had left behind more than just a bank account. I had left 8 years of being invisible, dispensable, useful only when money was needed. When I got home, I had 32 unread messages. Marcus, Chantel, even Jamal had texted asking what was wrong with Grandma. I quickly reviewed them all. None asked how I was. None offered an apology. All demanded explanations as if I owed them justification for protecting myself. The last message was from Marcus, and it read, "Mom, this is ridiculous. You are an adult. You can't act like a child just because you got upset about something. Call me and let's talk like civilized people." I read those words and something inside me hardened even more. That's how he saw me. As a child throwing a tantrum, not as a woman who had been lied to, used, and deliberately excluded, not as a mother who deserved a minimum of consideration, just as a source of money that was malfunctioning and needed to be fixed with condescending words. That night, I sat down to eat alone, as I had for the last 3 weeks. But this time, it was different. I set the table properly. I used the nice plates I saved for visitors who never came. I served the meal in reasonable portions. I ate slowly, savoring every bite. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel that horrible emptiness in my chest. I didn't feel like I was waiting for something that would never arrive. I was simply present in my own life. After dinner, I made myself some tea and sat on the couch with a book I had bought months ago but never opened. I read 3 chapters straight, without interruptions, without checking the phone every 5 minutes, hoping for messages that would make me feel less alone. The phone was there, occasionally vibrating with new messages that I systematically ignored, but it no longer owned me. It no longer dictated my peace. The following days were a strange mixture of liberation and pain. There was a part of me that felt incredibly light, as if I had been carrying a backpack full of stones for years and had finally set it down. But there were also moments of panic, that anxiety that comes when you break a pattern that, although destructive, was familiar. I would wake up in the middle of the night, heart racing, wondering if I had done the right thing, if I was being too harsh, if a good mother would act this way. But then I remembered the cruise photos. I remembered the lie. I remembered the $62,000. And the doubt dissolved, replaced by something more solid: conviction. Dot came over every afternoon. Sometimes we talked, sometimes we just sat in silence drinking coffee. Her presence was a reminder that I wasn't crazy, that my reaction was completely valid. A week after closing the bank account, Marcus showed up at my door. He didn't call first, he didn't ask if it was a good time. He simply showed up on a Saturday morning, ringing the doorbell insistently until I opened it. When I saw him standing there, still tanned from the Caribbean sun, wearing a shirt I didn't recognize and had probably bought in some expensive cruise shop, I felt something I never thought I would feel toward my son: coldness. "Mom, we need to talk," he said, with that tone of authority he used when he wanted to control the situation. I didn't invite him in. We stood right there in the doorway, him in the hallway, me blocking the entrance. "Talk," I said simply. He blinked, clearly surprised by my lack of hospitality. "This is ridiculous. You can't just close the account like that. You can't ignore my calls. I'm your son." "Exactly," I replied with a calm I didn't know I possessed. "You are my son, and I am your mother. Not your bank, not your financial solution, not the person you lie to and exclude when it's convenient." Marcus ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture he'd had since he was a boy. "Mom, if this is about the trip, I can explain. We were going to tell you, but Chantel thought it would be better to surprise you afterward." "Surprise me?" I repeated slowly. "Surprise me by posting photos on social media where I could see them. Surprise me by lying that you had canceled the trip due to money problems. Surprise me by taking Chantel's parents, but not me. What kind of surprise is that, Marcus?" He shifted uncomfortably. "It was a misunderstanding. Things got out of hand. You know how Chantel is with her planning." "No," I stopped him. "Don't blame Chantel. You called me. You lied to me. You asked me for $6,000 3 weeks after spending who knows how much on that cruise." His expression changed. The mask of the worried son cracked. And for a moment, I saw something ugly underneath: irritation, impatience, as if I were an annoying obstacle that needed to be removed so he could get back to normal. "Mom, you're overreacting. I'm asking to borrow, not for a handout. I've always paid you back." That was the last straw. That blatant, obvious lie, so insulting to my intelligence. "Never," I said, raising my voice for the first time. "You have never paid me back a single cent. In 8 years, Marcus, $62,300. I did the math. I have it all documented. Every transfer, every temporary loan that was never repaid. So don't you dare stand there and lie to my face again." His face turned red. He seemed genuinely surprised that I had kept a record, as if he had never considered that I could be that organized, that aware. "That's different," he stammered. "That was for the family, for the kids, for emergencies." "What emergency was the cruise?" I asked. He didn't answer. He just looked at me with that mixture of frustration and disbelief, as if I had become a stranger. And maybe I had. Maybe the mother he knew, that woman who said yes to everything, who swallowed every story, who prioritized his needs over her own dignity, had died sometime over the last few weeks. "Mom, I don't know what's been going on with you lately, but this has to be fixed. I need access to the account. I need things to go back to normal." "No," I said simply. That word, so short, so powerful, hung in the air between us like a final sentence. There will be no more transfers. There will be no more loans. There will be no more joint account. It's over, Marcus. He took a step toward me, and for a second, I thought he was going to yell at me. But instead, his voice came out low, threatening. "You are making a mistake. You're going to end up alone, old and alone. And when you need something, when you're the one who needs help, I won't be there." "I'm already alone," I replied without emotion. "I've been alone for 3 years. Ever since you decided I was only valuable when I could give you something. And you know what? I prefer to be truly alone than to be surrounded by people who only see me as a walking wallet. Marcus shook his head, his expression hardening. You're selfish. After everything we've done for you, Chantel includes you in family gatherings. The kids call you. I come visit. And this is how you repay us? Every word was a revelation. So my presence in their lives was a favor they were doing me. The crumbs of attention I received were a payment for my financial generosity. Not love, not family, just a transaction. Go, I said. My voice sounded tired. Now get out of my house, Marcus. He stared at me for a long moment, perhaps expecting me to break, to give in, as I always had. But I held his gaze without flinching. Finally, he turned around. You're going to regret this, he said over his shoulder as he walked toward the elevator. I don't think so, I murmured when the door closed. I stood there for several minutes processing what had just happened. I had confronted my son. I had set boundaries. I had said no. And the world hadn't ended. The sky hadn't fallen. I was still breathing. I was still standing. I was still myself, only now with a little more dignity intact. That afternoon, Dot knocked on the door as if she had sensed I needed her. I told her everything. She hugged me for a long time. I'm proud of you, she whispered. I know it hurts. I know it's hard. But what you did today was an act of self-love. We cried together. Not exactly tears of sadness, but something more complex. It was like crying for a version of myself that had died, a version that thought her worth lay in how much she could give, how much she could endure, how much she could sacrifice. Dot didn't leave that night. She stayed for dinner. And then we watched an old movie on TV. It was the first time in months I had genuinely laughed. The first time I enjoyed a moment without that background anxiety, waiting for the phone to ring, for someone to need me, for me to have to be available. The following days were quieter. Marcus didn't come back. Chantel's messages became less frequent until they disappeared completely. It was as if they had understood that this time I wouldn't give in. Or perhaps they had simply found another source of funding and I was no longer necessary. Whatever the reason, the silence was a relief. I started doing things I had postponed for years. I signed up for a painting class at the community center. I met other women my age who were also rediscovering themselves after years of living for others. One of them, I had gone through something similar with her own children. We quickly became friends, united by that silent understanding that only comes from having survived the same thing. One morning, 2 weeks after Marcus's visit, I went to a travel agency. I had seen an ad for tours in Italy, and something in me woke up. I want information about this trip, I told the agent, a young woman with a kind smile. She showed me photos of Rome, Florence, and Venice, places I had always wanted to see, but had postponed because there was always something more important to spend the money on, always someone else who needed it more than me. How much does it cost? I asked. She gave me the price. $4,500 for a 10-day all-inclusive tour. 6 months ago, that number would have seemed impossible to spend on myself, too selfish, too frivolous. But now, after everything I had been through, after finally understanding that my life also had value, that number seemed perfectly reasonable. I'll take it, I said. The agent blinked, surprised by my quick decision. Are you sure? Do you want to think about it? I don't need to think about it, I replied. I've been thinking all my life. It's time to act. Booking that trip was the first truly selfish act I had done in decades. And I say selfish without the negative weight that word had always carried for me. It was selfish in the pure sense, something just for me that didn't benefit anyone else, that didn't solve anyone's problem except my need to live before it was too late. I left the travel agency with the documents in hand and a strange feeling in my chest that took me a moment to identify. It was excitement. It was anticipation. It was the feeling of having something to look forward to that involved no one but myself. I called Dot from the street. I did it, I said as soon as she answered. I booked the trip to Italy. She screamed with delight on the other end of the line. Ruby, I'm so proud of you. When do you leave? In 6 weeks, 10 days touring cities I had only seen on postcards. We hung up, and I stood there on the sidewalk, smiling like a fool, feeling the sun on my face, and thinking that maybe, just maybe, at 73, I was finally learning to live. For myself. The following weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. I bought a new suitcase because the one I had was old and full of memories of family trips I never really enjoyed. I went to a clothing store and tried on dresses I never would have dared to wear before. I bought a mustard-colored one, cheerful, bold, completely different from the gray and beige tones I had worn for years to avoid drawing attention. The saleswoman, a young woman with tattoos on her arms, told me, "It looks gorgeous on you. You look radiant." And I looked in the mirror, and for the first time in a long time, I liked what I saw. I wasn't the invisible grandmother. I wasn't the rejected mother. I was Ruby, a 73-year-old woman who was choosing herself. I bought the dress and two more. I also bought comfortable walking shoes, a small camera for photos, and a notebook to write down my impressions of the trip. Dot and Yvette helped me plan. We reviewed maps, researched restaurants, and made lists of places I couldn't miss. It was fun. It was light. It was everything my family gatherings never were. There was no hidden tension. There were no requests disguised as conversation. Just three older women excited about planning an adventure. One afternoon, while having tea in my living room, Yvette asked me, "Have you heard anything from your son?" I shook my head. Nothing. Absolute silence. She nodded understandingly. "It's better that way. Silence is sometimes the clearest answer. Are you worried they might show up while you're gone?" The question caught me by surprise. I thought about it honestly. "No," I finally replied. "I'm not afraid of anything they can do or say anymore. That power is over." 2 weeks before the trip, something unexpected happened. I received an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line read, "Regarding Marcus and Chantel." I opened it with curiosity and a little caution. It was from Chuck Hull, Chantel's father. The message was formal but direct. "Dear Ruby, I have recently learned of the situation between you and my daughter and son-in-law. Chantel finally told me about the cruise and the circumstances. I want you to know that I was not aware that they had lied to you about the trip's cancellation. Had I known, I would not have accepted the invitation. What they did is unacceptable. You deserve an apology, which I suspect you will never receive from them. So, I offer you mine. I also want you to know that my wife and I will no longer accept anything from them that indirectly comes from your generosity. We have had a serious conversation with Chantel about values and respect. I wish you the very best. Sincerely, Chuck Holt." I read the email 3 times. I didn't expect that. I didn't expect someone from that side of the family to have the decency to acknowledge what had happened. I replied briefly, "Dear Chuck, I appreciate your message and your honesty. I hold no resentment toward you or your wife. I hope Chantel learns from this. Regards, Ruby Payne." It was strange. My daughter-in-law's father had more integrity than my own son. That irony was not lost on me. But it also gave me something akin to hope. Not hope that things with Marcus would improve, but hope that there were still decent people in the world. People who recognized when something was wrong. People who apologized even when it wasn't directly their fault. That was more than my son had ever done. The day before my trip, as I finished packing, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't have saved, but I recognized it immediately. Jamal, my oldest grandson. I hesitated before answering. "Hello," I finally said. "Grandma?" His voice sounded strange, nervous. "Can I talk to you?" "Of course," I replied, mentally preparing myself for some manipulative request. But what he said surprised me. "Grandma, I want to apologize. I know Mom and Dad lied to you about the cruise. I heard the arguments. I know they've been asking you for money for years, and I never said anything. I was complicit in my silence. I am so sorry." I sat on the edge of the bed processing his words. Jamal was 21. He was an adult, and he was taking responsibility for his part in all this. That was more mature than anything his father had done. Thank you for calling, Jamal, I said softly. That means a lot to me. There was a long silence on the other end. Grandma, there's something else you need to know. Mom and Dad are in serious financial trouble. They've always lived beyond their means. I think they counted on your money as part of their budget. Now that you closed the account, they are panicking. They had to sell Mom's car. They are behind on payments for several things. And instead of accepting that they created this problem, they are blaming you. My heart hardened. So it was true. They weren't emergencies. They weren't temporary crises. It was a lifestyle they couldn't sustain without my money. Jamal, I appreciate you telling me this, but you need to understand something. I am not responsible for your parents' financial problems. They are adults. They made their decisions. Now they have to live with the consequences. I know, he said quickly. I'm not calling to ask you to help them. I'm calling because I want you to know that I don't think like them, that I understand what they did to you was wrong, and that if you ever want to have a relationship with me independent of them, I would like that. Those words touched me deeply. It was the closest thing to a victory I could expect from this situation. Not getting my son back, but maybe eventually having a real connection with my grandson, one based on mutual respect, not financial transactions. I would like that too, Jamal, I replied, my voice cracking. Thank you for calling. Take care of yourself. You too, Grandma, and enjoy your trip. Naomi told me you deserve it. We hung up, and I sat there with the phone in my hand, crying softly. But this time, they weren't tears of pain. It was something closer to relief, the validation of knowing I wasn't crazy, that my reaction had been justified. The next morning, Dot and Yvette accompanied me to the airport. I had my new suitcase, my mustard dress carefully packed, my camera, my notebook, and for the first time in 8 years, I carried something more important: hope. Hope that life still had good things reserved for me, that it wasn't too late to be happy, that 73 wasn't the end, but perhaps a new beginning. We hugged at the airport entrance. Dot squeezed me tight. You're going to be incredible, she whispered. You'll come back renewed. Don't let anything or anyone take this from you. I promise, I said, and I meant it. I walked through airport security feeling lighter than I had in years. Every step away from my old life was a step towards something new, something mine, something no one could take away from me because I hadn't bought it with their approval or their presence. I had bought it with my own money, earned by my own work, for my own happiness. The flight was long, but I didn't care. I looked out the window at the clouds, thinking about everything I had gone through to get there. The $62,000 lost, the lies discovered, the difficult confrontations, the boundaries set, and finally, this freedom. When the plane landed in Rome, I got off with the other passengers, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't thinking about anyone else. I wasn't worrying about whether Marcus needed something. I wasn't feeling guilty about spending money on myself. I wasn't justifying my decisions to anyone. I was just there, present, alive, ready for 10 days of discovery, not just of Italy, but of myself. Who was Ruby when no one else was watching, when no one else was asking, when no one else mattered but me? Italy was a revelation, not just for the stunning architecture or the delicious food or the history-filled streets. It was a revelation because I discovered that I could be happy alone, that I didn't need my family's validation to feel that my life had purpose, that at 73, I could still surprise myself. The first day in Florence, I walked until my feet ached. I visited the Uffizi Gallery and stood in front of a painting for 20 minutes, just feeling. No one rushed me, no one asked when we were going to eat, no one complained about being bored. It was just me and the art and the comfortable silence of being at peace with myself. I ate at a small trattoria where the waiter, an older man with a gray mustache, treated me as if I were the most important customer in the world. He recommended a wine, he told me stories about the neighborhood, and I laughed genuinely for the first time in months. In Venice, I sat by the water and watched the canals. The water was a color I had never seen in person. There were families playing, young couples holding hands, and older people like me walking along the edge. Everyone seemed to be exactly where they should be. I took out my notebook and started writing. Not a structured diary, just loose thoughts. I have lived for 73 years, and only now do I understand that my happiness shouldn't depend on making others happy. Giving until I was empty wasn't love, it was self-destruction. Real family isn't the one that shares your blood, it's the one that respects your heart. The words flowed effortlessly, as if I had been storing them for years and they had finally found an outlet. A woman sat near me. She was Italian with completely white hair and deep wrinkles around her eyes. She asked me in Italian where I was from. I answered in my imperfect English, America. Ah, American, she smiled. Traveling alone? Yes, I replied. And for the first time, that phrase didn't sound sad or lonely. It sounded like a choice, like power. She nodded with understanding. Me too. My children want me to stay home, to wait for them, to be available when they need me. But I decided that my last years will be mine. We looked at each other, and in that moment, we shared something that needed no words. That silent understanding between women who have lived whole lives prioritizing others and have finally decided to prioritize themselves. We talked for an hour. She told me about her life, her disappointments, her small acts of rebellion. I told her my story. She listened without interrupting. And when I finished, she placed her wrinkled hand on mine. "You did the right thing," she said simply. "Forgiveness is important, but self-respect is sacred." We said goodbye with a hug, and I never saw her again, but her words stayed with me. In Florence, I visited the Duomo and climbed to the top. The steps were steep, and my breathing grew labored, but I didn't give up. When I reached the top, the view of the city took my breath away. Everything looked small from up there. My problems, my pains, my ungrateful son, everything was tiny compared to the vastness of the world. I took out my camera and took photos, not to show anyone, but to remember this moment, to have physical evidence that Ruby was here, that she existed beyond being a mother, a grandmother, a wallet. A young couple asked me to take their picture. I did it gladly. Then they insisted on taking one of me. I hesitated. I wasn't used to being the center of attention, but I accepted. I stood in front of the overlook with the wind moving my gray hair, and I smiled. A real, unforced smile. When I saw the photo afterward, I barely recognized myself. There was something different in my eyes, something akin to freedom. Every city taught me something. In Venice, as I watched the gondolas, I understood that the most valuable things require patience and care, and that I had spent all my patience on people who didn't value it, forgetting to build something beautiful for myself. In Rome, as I ate authentic pasta, I understood that nourishing my body and soul wasn't selfishness, it was survival. I had spent years feeding others while I starved emotionally. In each place, I left something behind. Not physical things, but pieces of the old Ruby. The one who was afraid, the one who felt guilty, the one who thought her worth resided in her usefulness. That woman was left behind in every Italian city until only the new Ruby remained, the one who knew her value, the one who didn't ask permission to be happy. Throughout the trip, I kept my phone in airplane mode most of the time. I only turned it on once a day to send a quick text to Dot telling her I was okay. I didn't check for messages from Marcus. I didn't look for updates on social media. I didn't allow myself to be reabsorbed into that world that had consumed me for so long. And it was liberating. It was like detoxing from an addiction I didn't know I had. The addiction to being needed. The addiction to feeling that I mattered, even if it was only for my money. I was learning to matter to myself, and that was enough. On the last day of the tour, the group had a farewell dinner in Rome. There were 15 of us from different countries and ages. During dinner, the guide asked us to share what the trip had meant to each of us. When my turn came, I hesitated. I wasn't good at speaking in front of groups. But something pushed me to be honest. This trip, I began, my voice trembling, wasn't just about seeing Italy. It was about seeing myself after years of being lost in the needs of others. I came here after cutting financial ties with my son, who was using me like a bank. I came here after deciding that my last years were mine, not for people who only value me for what I can give. And I discovered that I can be happy alone. That chosen solitude is better than company that makes you feel invisible. So this trip saved my life. Not literally, but it saved what was left of my dignity. When I finished, there were tears in my eyes, and also in the eyes of several people in the group. A woman from Canada stood up and hugged me. "Me too," she whispered. "I'm learning that too." We hugged like sisters in pain and in healing. That night in my hotel room, I finally turned my phone on completely. I had 53 unread messages. Most were from unknown numbers, some from Chantel, a few from Marcus. I opened one at random from Chantel. It read, "Ruby, Marcus and I are having serious financial problems. We had to sell the car. The kids are suffering because of your selfishness. I hope you're happy." I read the message without feeling anything. Neither guilt nor rage, only indifference. It was fascinating how someone could take zero responsibility for their own decisions, how they could spend money they didn't have on a luxury cruise and then blame me for the consequences of their actions. I deleted the message. I checked a few more. All had the same tone: accusations, manipulation, attempts to make me feel guilty. But this time, it didn't work. The part of me that responded to manipulation had died. I deleted all the messages without replying to any of them. There was a message from Jamal. It was different. "Grandma, I hope your trip is amazing. Mom and Dad are mad, but that's not your problem. I started looking for a job so I can move out on my own. I don't want to be part of this dynamic anymore. When you get back, I'd like to see you without them. Just you and me. Take care." That message made me cry. But they were good tears, tears of hope. My grandson was breaking the pattern. He was choosing to be different. I replied briefly, "Jamal, the trip was transformative. I'd love to see you when I get back. I'm proud of you for making your own decisions. I love you. Send." Then I turned off the phone again. Tomorrow, I would fly back home, but I wouldn't be the same woman who had left. That Ruby had stayed somewhere between Rome and Venice. The one returning was stronger, more aware, more complete. The flight back was different from the outbound one. This time, I wasn't looking ahead with nervous hope. I was looking back with gratitude. Gratitude for every lesson learned, for every boundary set, for every time I chose my peace over their approval. When the plane landed, Dot and Yvette were waiting for me. They ran toward me when I came out, and the three of us hugged, crying and laughing at the same time. "You look different," Dot said, pulling back to look at me closely. "There's something in your eyes." "I am different," I confirmed. "I am complete." On the way home, I told them about the trip, the cities, the woman on the water's edge, the farewell dinner, and they listened with the attention that only true friends give. When we arrived at my apartment, something surprised me. There was a box in front of my door. The box was wrapped in plain brown paper with no sender label. Dot and Yvette looked at each other cautiously. "Do you want us to stay while you open it?" Yvette asked. I nodded. I didn't know what to expect, but their presence gave me security. We went into the apartment, and I put the suitcase aside. The box wasn't heavy. I placed it on the kitchen table and opened it slowly. Inside were several things. First, a letter in a white envelope. Beneath it, all the cards I had given Marcus over the years. Birthday cards, Father's Day cards, Christmas cards. There were also old photos from when he was a child, his graduation, his wedding, and at the bottom, a check. I took it out with trembling hands. It was for $5,000 signed by Marcus. In the memo line, it said, "First payment." I stared at the check for a long time, unsure how to feel. Dot broke the silence. "Read the letter," she said softly. I opened the envelope. The handwriting was Marcus's. That slanted script I had known since he learned to write. Mom, I don't know how to start this letter. I've written and rewritten these words for weeks. Nothing sounds like enough. Nothing can repair what I did, but I need to try. You are right about everything. I used you. I lied to you. I treated you like a bank instead of my mother. And the worst part is I knew it the whole time. I knew what we were doing was wrong. I knew we were hurting you, but it was easier to keep taking your money than to face our own financial problems. Chantel and I were living way above our means. We wanted to pretend we had a status we didn't, and you were the one who paid for our vanity. The cruise was the last straw, but honestly, it should have been any of the other 100 times I failed you before that. When you closed the bank account, I got angry. I blamed you. I told Chantel you were being irrational and vengeful, but when everything started to collapse, when we had to sell the car, when we fell behind on payments, when we faced the real consequences of our decisions without your safety net, something changed. I started to see what I had done. I started to understand the magnitude of my betrayal. I talked to Jamal. He told me some very hard but very true things. He told me I lost you not when you closed the account, but years before, when I decided you were more useful as a wallet than as a mother. And he was right. This check is just the beginning. I know $5,000 is nothing compared to the $62,000 I owe you, but it's all I could put together by selling some things and working extra hours. I plan to pay you $1,000 every month until I repay everything. Not because I expect your forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do. Tears streamed down my cheeks as I continued reading. I'm not asking you to call me. I'm not asking us to go back to how things were, because that would be impossible. And frankly, you deserve better than how things were before. I only ask you to know that I finally understood. I understood that I had an extraordinary mother and I treated her like garbage. I understood that the love you gave me throughout my life was invaluable, and I repaid it with indifference and usage. Chantel and I are in couples therapy. I'm also going to individual therapy. We are facing our problems head on for the first time in our marriage. It's painful and difficult, but necessary. The grandkids are also learning about financial responsibility and treating family with real respect, not transactional respect. I love you, Mom. I am so sorry, Marcus. I folded the letter slowly and placed it on the table. Dot and Yvette looked at me expectantly. What are you going to do? Dot asked. I don't know, I replied, honestly. Part of me wants to tear up the check and tell him it's too late, but another part, a very small but persistent part, wants to believe people can change. Yet took my hand. You don't have to decide anything now. Let time show you if it's genuine or just another manipulation. She was right. I had learned during these months that not all decisions needed to be made immediately, that it was okay to sit with the discomfort of not knowing. I put the letter and the check in a drawer. I would decide later. For now, I just wanted to enjoy being home after a life-changing trip. My friends stayed that night. We cooked together, we laughed, I shared photos of the trip, and for the first time in years, my house felt full in the right way. The following days were about adjusting. I would turn to my routine, but it was different. I no longer spent hours looking at the phone, waiting for messages that would make me feel needed. Instead, I filled my time with things I genuinely enjoyed: the painting class, walks with Dot, coffee with Yvette, and video calls with Jamal, who kept his word and began visiting me independently of his parents. These visits were different. He didn't come with his hand out. He came with stories about his new job, with genuine questions about my life, with real interest in getting to know the grandmother beyond the role she had played in their dysfunctional family. One afternoon, he brought me flowers. Just because, he said, because I want you to know I value you. I cried because finally someone in my family was giving me something without expecting anything in return. That was real family. 6 months after the trip to Italy, something changed. Marcus's check was still in the drawer, uncashed, but every week, an envelope with $1,000 in cash arrived in my mailbox. No notes, no explanations, just the money, fulfilling its promise. We met occasionally for coffee, always brief, always with clear boundaries. Chantel and I maintained a cordial but distant relationship. Jamal and Naomi visited me regularly, and without the pressure from their parents, we had built something real. Dot and Yet became my chosen family. We traveled together, we laughed together, we aged together without asking anyone's permission. I went back to Italy last year, taking Dot with me. We visited the same places, but it was different because I was different. Stronger, more complete, more mine. Today, 2 years after seeing those cruise photos, I am at peace. Marcus is still paying the debt. We're about $32,000 toward the $62,000. Our relationship is cordial, but it's no longer what it was. And that's okay, because I learned the most important lesson of my life at 73. Real family doesn't charge admission. Real love doesn't empty your bank account or your soul. And it is never, ever to choose yourself. I didn't lose $62,000. I bought my freedom. I bought my dignity. I bought my peace. I bought the opportunity to live my last years without carrying the weight of others' expectations. And if this story made you feel anything, if you identified with any part, if it made you think about your own boundaries or your own relationships, then my pain served something bigger than me. It served to remind you that you too deserve respect, that you too can say no, that you too can choose yourself without guilt. Because in the end, the only person you will live with your entire life is yourself. And that person deserves all your love, all your protection, and all your loyalty before you give it to anyone else, even before you give it to family. Because if you don't take care of yourself, no one else will. And that is the hardest and most liberating truth you will ever learn. Did you like my story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story with love and respect.